Hello, this is Gary at Selexa Studio and Workshop on the Isle of Skye. Welcome to this first video in a series featuring some recent upgrades to our Dore Westbury Mk1 milling machine. Before we begin, I should point out that the videos will not necessarily be in the same chronological order as the actual upgrades were, so in this video, alongside the upgrade we are discussing, you may notice one or two completed upgrades which will actually be covered in future videos. But before we get into the upgrades themselves, a little bit of background. The Dore Westbury milling machine was first developed in England in the late 1960s. It was designed for hobby machinists, model engineers in particular, and was sold as a kit of castings for enthusiasts to build themselves at home. The Mk1 model, which you see here, was in due course superseded by the Mk2, and production continued until the late 1990s. Although the Dore Westbury is a light benchtop mill, it has surprisingly large capacity and a high level of flexibility. My own Mk1 had been sitting neglected for a long time in the cellar's lean-to, and as you can see, it was dirty, grimy and covered in superficial rust. However, to my pleasant surprise, it ran nicely from the moment I switched it on, and following a strip down, clean up and reassembly, I was able to use the machine, and with it I completed jobs such as machining several components for the restoration of this tiny and quite rare Burke No. 0 horizontal mill. One fairly common issue that arises with the Dore Westbury is a difficulty in raising the main column of the machine. Obviously, this can be quite problematic as it impacts on its flexibility and workpiece capacity. The original design incorporates a spiral groove in the column and a circular collar with a key inside it, which locates in the groove and causes the column to raise and lower when the collar is turned using a small Tommy bar. However, there's a lot of weight riding on that small key, and if the column is a bit stiff in any case, it can become a bit of a problem, as it did for me. A common solution to this is for the user to install a hydraulic jack under the ram behind the column. This can work quite well, and at least one owner has created a column lift powered by an electric motor. My own solution, however, was to fit the machine with a hand-operated cable winch. Now, a caveat is due here. As the manufacturers of the winch point out, hand-operated winches are designed for pulling heavy objects, not for lifting. This is a safety issue, because generally all that would prevent a load from crashing to the ground would be either the operator's grip on the handle or the winch's ratchet mechanism. For this reason, I can't recommend that anyone uses this approach. But if you do, be careful. That said, the Dore Westbury does have two locking bolts at the base of the column, and as long as these are kept tightened at all times, other than when the column is actually being raised or lowered, they, not the winch, are supporting the weight, and the column cannot move. So, I had a good luck to find this weightlifting pulley assembly, which was left abandoned in our loft by the previous occupants of our house. I used a DIY laser level to make sure that the winch, the pulleys and the top of the mill's column would all be in alignment. The winch was to be fixed to the bench, but because it had to be in the same plane as the pulley assembly, it was necessary to mount it on a wooden block to prevent the handle from hitting the bench. I'm not going to go into step-by-step detail on the installation, as everyone's situation and requirements are different. Suffice to say though, that for safety reasons, the whole setup has to be very sturdy. I used plenty of M10 fixings throughout, and I wouldn't recommend using anything smaller for a job of this kind. At every opportunity, I also follow the principle of combining horizontal and vertical fasteners to really pin things down and keep them in place. We all know this feeling. It usually happens when you're in a really awkward, uncomfortable position. As you can see, the setup works pretty well, and it's a while since this video was shot, so it works even better and more smoothly now as the column has loosened up through use. Here's an example of the capacity of the Dore Westbury. Admittedly in this case it's drilling wood, not milling metal, but it's being used to make a small pilot hole in the centre of a plywood disc, which will become one of the tube rings of a large astronomical telescope. Not many small benchtop drill presses would have the depth and reach to be able to do this. I hope you enjoyed this video. There will be more to follow in due course, featuring other upgrades to this machine. Thanks for watching.